The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome to this week's review. It's time to talk about Doctor Who, and I'll be talking about the episode titled Boom from Season 14, or Series 1, depending on which way you want to cut this. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below, and you will be on a future video, but between then and now, let us get into the review and start off as we always do with these reviews by talking about the story and the writing and related topics around that matter. Now, this might be a bit presumptuous for me to say this, and might be a bit bold for me to say this early into the review, but I have to say that this particular episode is the best of this new era / Disney Plus era of Doctor Who. I'm going to be blunt, this is not the greatest episode of the revived series. It frankly isn't, but from what we've had over the past few weeks and months, this is certainly my favourite thus far. I know that I'm going in hard with the praise outright, but this is an episode which works on every level that every episode of the Russell T Davies Mark II era frankly struggles with. This is a harder science fiction story, the pacing is near perfect, whilst it is certainly imaginative, it certainly isn't too fantastical, and it does give our cast time to show off what they're capable of from the point of view of performance. This is everything that I could possibly want from a modern episode of Doctor Who, almost to the exact letter, though of course that's a whole other matter for a whole other time. I know that some people will flippantly refer to this episode as being a bottle episode, this meaning that it's rather small scale and rather a self-contained experience, but the truth of the matter is that when an episode is as good as this, that frankly doesn't matter. It has a very simple core idea that Stephen Moffat, as a writer, was able to build up from and to create something which I'm certain will be looked upon as being one of the best of this particular season and possibly one of the best of the Disney Plus era of Doctor Who. This all kicks off with the Doctor stepping on a landmine, and in time we end up discovering about a war that doesn't exist for the sake of corporate profit. And at the end of the day, love saves the day! Which some people may roll their eyes work, but in the context of this show, it works, and it's fine. It's a perfectly fine way to wrap things up. I think it is neat. I think that it is perfectly keeping within the slightly more mythical, magical side of the Moffat style of writing. I've always said that Stephen Moffat is at his best when he focuses down on an idea. When he has these grand master plan stuff with all these complex storylines where he's pulling in sources from here, there and everywhere. When he's trying to recontextualise and change the landscape of Doctor Who and to introduce these big, multifaceted storylines. For me, that never really worked, and I've always felt that he was at his best when he just focused down on a simple idea and then built up from that. And with this episode, he just boils everything down to such a laser-focused degree that I think it plays fantastically well. The Doctor and Ruby arrive on a war zone, on a planet in the far future. Everything is grim and unpleasant to look at, and they're not just wandering about inside of a quarry, as certainly would have been the case in a different era of Doctor Who, a place where many battles have happened, and we can see the scars of that all across the landscape. Though, to be fair though, maybe it shouldn't look like that, because as we learn over the course of this episode, there aren't really aliens for them to fight, so why it all looks as bad as this, I can't honestly say I understand why, but I suppose you could excuse that by saying that the company just fed them false data, so they were just launching attacks and mortar strikes here, there and everywhere to, make them think they're fighting a war and winning it, when in reality they aren't. But hey, maybe that's a minor plot hole, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter because that's not important. This episode does have a few nods here and there to past adventures, some of them a little bit more obvious than others, some of which I might, upon future recollection, might feel they're a bit tenuous, but hey, it's just stuff that I've noticed. Of course, we have Stephen Moffat once again dusting off his I can't believe it's not 40k space marine priests, though of course that episode did have a lot more tee religion, am I right, which thankfully isn't the case here. The design of the ambulance robots looks like something at the Paradise Towers episode from the 1980s, and of course the episode ends with a reference to fish fingers and custard, which, can you tell this was written by Stephen Moffat? Because certainly, if you couldn't tell by the fact there was actually pacing and then broader mystery here and things were generally doled out to us at a better pace than what we have recently, that probably was the thing that underscored it. But hey, given how references are thrown about in this programme, you honestly couldn't probably otherwise tell. But anyway, I will say is that whilst I did enjoy the tension of the Doctor being on the landmine and the whole sequence of events, there is still a part of me that wished that we could get a little bit more from that. It feels as though there was a little bit too much talking for my liking. It wasn't exposition though, I have to underline that. There was a lot of talking, but it was a lot more character driven, it was a lot more emotive. It wasn't just characters reeling off their backstory ad nauseum as we had in the previous 2 episodes. That I would have liked a few moments of just quiet to help focus things down and to give us an understanding of where the Doctor is mentally right now. Whilst Kutagatwa does do a fantastic job in the performance of that and conveys so much in times by saying so little, which is stuff I'll talk about in the performance section, there is a part of me that does wish that at the very least we might have had an internal monologue or 2, because let's face it, I think that's what it needed. They just needed that it's almost like, you just have that extra little element to make this truly a fantastic episode. And I will just say, and this is a slight sidebar to all of this, is that for a minefield in the middle of a war zone, there sure are a lot of people knocking about close to it, aren't they? Like, this feels... just how quickly everyone ends up landing on this minefield, it feels like it's just around the corner. It feels like they'd be able to just hear all this kicking off just down the road, and that maybe the entire detachment could have come down there and just seen the spectacle as it was unfolding. Maybe that would have added an extra element to the episode, I don't know, but it just feels a little bit odd that very early on into the episode we get the little girl, and then we get the friend of the little girl's father, and then we get the potential boyfriend of the girl that is the friend of the father, just all descending on this location, all in quick succession, one after the other. Yes, I get that this is a story, yes, I get the point of that, but it feels a mite bit too convenient for my liking, but still, in the grand scheme of problems this episode had, I can't say this was a major one. This week we get further development on the whole situation with Ruby Sunday and the mystery surrounding her. Though I say development, it is largely pretty much doing what we did last week, and honestly, it's fine. The idea of her having no next of kin, I think that alone would have been a perfectly fine way to build upon this mystery. They didn't need to go back to doing the snow falling thing, because that was a great image last week. It was a great, just arresting image to have within that particular episode. Just 2 characters inside, and all of a sudden it starts snowing, and that itself was good. It was creepy, it was weird, it was mysterious, but to then have that again in this particular moment so soon after we've had it previously feels a bit too repetitive for me. Hell, they could have at least saved it a little bit by they're all there, the mind your own business, and this stuff starts falling from the sky and someone says, oh, it's just ash, don't worry about it. Then they realise it's snow, and that could have added a little bit more to it, but hey, the whole thing about no next of kin, I think that itself was a good enough indicator that there's something mysterious with Ruby Sunday. Though, of course, the whole thing about summoning snow last week kind of really kicked that into high gear. It almost feels like a scene missing thing, or these episodes are done out of order. Like, maybe if we had the no next of kin thing towards the start of the season, then we started to build into the snow stuff, that would have helped build the mystery out more. Now it kind of just feels like... I don't even know how to describe it, so I'll just put a pin in that and maybe save that for the season-long review later on. Though I will just say is that the whole next of kin thing, or the no next of kin thing, could easily have just been dismissed as being just an end result of time and space being in flux. You know, the future has not been written, so make it a good one. And that, hey, maybe in a different point, a different timeline, she might have had next of kin. That would have been fine, the way the Doctor could explain that. The fact that that whole plot thread, that whole moment just isn't explained or discussed about, it feels like it should have been, like at the end of the episode, there maybe should have been a scene between the Doctor and Ruby just discussing what the no next of kin thing meant, and the Doctor then just reassuring her that no, time's always in flux, and you know, this is a machine from the future, its records aren't going to be good, and then you get some kind of worried look from the Doctor off screen that maybe there's something else going on here that he isn't too keen on, and that itself would have been perfectly fine. As far as the pacing itself is concerned, as I mentioned previously, I think that this is a great episode. Just having a moment where everything can just breathe, and the mystery and all the terror and all the problems that the Doctor and their companion are facing can actually have time to expand out into the air and be explored. I think is great. It is something I really did love about the Moffat era and the Chibnall era. For their many sins, they at least gave us an opportunity to understand the mystery and try and figure out how the Doctor's going to solve it. And I felt that the pacing was always a problem with the Russell T Davies era, because it was almost constantly the Doctor running to and from things, pointing at things, delivering exposition, whilst the dun 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 music played in the background. And we didn't get that this week. It was far more pared down. There is a part of me that just keeps having these flashes in the back of my mind as to how this would have looked like had Russell T Davies written it, or some other writer, that maybe the whole thing about the minefield would have been solved far earlier on, and then the Doctor would have been taking down this evil company once and for all, which he doesn't quite do, which is fine, because maybe it sets up to meet them at a future point, or this is just yet another problem in the future that humanity itself has to deal with, and the Doctor can't solve everything, or whichever way you want to cut it. I think it's perfectly fine. The fact that the Doctor just stops the war, I think is good enough, or rather the little girl's dad is the one that stops the war because love transcends time and space, which is fine. It's perfectly fine. Again, as I said maybe previously, I think that there's a lot of people who will look at the whole love's conquering all, true love saves the day thing and roll their eyes. There is a part of me that thinks that maybe it would have worked a little bit better had we got a little bit more time with the father and the daughter character together. But if you did on that, maybe you wouldn't have had such a strong and unpleasant opening. And when I say unpleasant, I don't mean that as a negative. The fact it is so grungy and nasty and tense and unpleasant is what makes that a really strong opening. There's a part of me that kind of got a little bit disappointed when the Doctor and Ruby showed up. So I think it's a good time as any to now pivot into the performances and just say that I think that this is certainly the best performance thus far from both Ncuti Gatwa and from, is it Millie Gibson or Jodie Gibson? Hang on, let me check. Yeah, Millie Gibson. I both think that both of them did fantastically well, and this does lead credence into my feeling that I don't want to end up saying bad performances, but we'll say lesser performances from them from the previous couple of weeks is more of a impact of the writing than necessarily their ability as actors, or maybe it's a failure of directing, because I think that both of them this week did well. Naturally, Ncuti Gatwa was by far and away the best element within this episode, really showing his range as an actor. Once again, we get him singing because that's the thing that he does, and that's just going to be a trait of his Doctor now, it feels like. But he is able to play the role and the situation that he's in with a certain degree of pathos that I think that the element and the scene itself needed. Again, I do think that he needed a little bit of time on his own, just to reflect on things, to just show a greater degree of emotions that this particular character has. Because the Doctor, in situations like this, whilst they will try to put a brave face on it, they can be rather angry and mad and upset with themselves to get into a situation like this, which is an element I think that maybe was missing. Millie Gibson, as I said, did far better this week in the previous 2 weeks, as it does feel as though the character is starting to come into their own, that we get a better sense of her as a character, and she's not just running about doing the modern Doctor Who companion thing of just being the wide-eyed, oh golly gee willikers, we're going on a hecking big adventure thing, which I think is something that has let her down up until this point, and certain other previous companions that we've had recently. I will say as though that there is still an element of the oh golly wee jillikers, we're going on an adventure bit, particularly towards the start of the episode, where the whole thing of oh shit, I'm on a war zone in the future just didn't really seem to hit her. Like, this is the first time that she's on another world, and while she doesn't know that immediately, like, if I opened the door and I stepped out into a war zone, my response to it wouldn't be, oh, this is weird. It'd be, what the hell's going on? And I think that a lot of other people would have that same kind of result, and a lot of the other companions that we've had up until this moment. So, a bit of a plot hole there. It does feel as though it is a bit of an issue for me. It's not something that I think will condemn her performance in this episode, as I do think that she does well for what she is. I don't want to end up saying this because it feels incredibly mean-spirited, but I think that in the interest of fairness it has to be raised, which is that the young actor playing the little girl, she wasn't quite there for me, but I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt purely and simply because they were written in such a bad way. Like, I know that I should have talked about this in the writing section, but the little girl character just, I don't even know how to best describe it. I don't think it's tone deaf, but the reaction that she gave to certain situations and where she was just didn't feel human at all. And you'd be able to forgive that if that was just a part of her character, if that was just a part of the fact that she's grown up in this militant installation. As such, she has maybe a stunted view on these kind of things upon death and being comfortable around death, or that faith gives her this shield to be able to get around this stuff. But how she was reacting in certain moments just felt odd to me. I'm not to go over the episode, but when she first sees her dad is a hologram, that should have been the moment she clicked, oh crap, my dad is dead, oh god, what has happened? But instead she's running down this going, Daddy, it's here, I can see him, ooh! Which just didn't work. Like, you could flip back into the opposite, where she sees the hologram, she's heartbroken, and she wants to see the urn thing to try and get some kind of indication of how he died. Like, you could still have that same series of events, but just change the tone of it, which sadly isn't what we ended up getting. Again, I'm not going to blame her for the performance. I don't want to do that, because there's sparks of the character being done better there. I think there's elements there, and I think that she does fine enough, but it just feels like a case of again, it's much like this episode itself. It's a case of good, but just not there. But with that said, let's get into the overview and just say that even though I am kind of sound like I'm starting to pivot into ragging on this episode, I really aren't. I think it's one of those situations where it's really difficult to find legitimate criticisms with it, because it almost perfectly does every single goddamn thing it needs to do perfectly well. And the things it doesn't do so well, it's just procedural stuff. It's just ones and zeros, mechanical stuff that 9 times out of 10 just feels more like a case of personal opinion, more so than it ends up feeling like a genuine issue with the episode itself. Though, of course, these reviews are my own personal opinion, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend as though everything was good or everything was terrible just for the sake of views and clicks and likes, unlike certain broadcasters out there that cover this programme, not naming any names. But still, the episode itself is good, and certainly of the return of the Russell T Davies era, I think this is my favourite. I think that Wild Blue Yonder, it would be between this and the Wild Blue Yonder as to which episode I think is the best of this return. Maybe Wild Blue Yonder's second, maybe this one. It really isn't that easy for me to say, but hey, this episode was great. I really did enjoy it. Oh, and by the way, the friend of the father, I think that she's supposed to be the new companion or the actor that's supposed to be the new companion that's coming through next season, which, yes, I haven't touched upon, because what the hell is there to touch upon, because it's not going to be this character, so there's little point in referring to it. It's just one of those weird serendipitous moments where she appeared. I think that performatively she was great. I think that she played the role perfectly well. I think she certainly has a range to her that I feel that Millie Gibson is currently lacking, or at least the writing that she's been given is lacking. But still, with all that said and done, a great, fantastic episode. And with that said and done, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. Hey, it's a double bubble barrel time shift Comment Corner, because I'm reading comments from the previous 2 episodes, because I had to record those episodes back to back, because double bill or whatever you know what happened last week. But anyway, we'll start off by reading the first comment from Big X1, which says, and this is referring to the episode Space Babies, this episode was so weird I don't know what to feel about it. And judging by some of the comments online, I think that's pretty much the overriding feeling that I think a lot of people had. Not the majority. I think that the most accepted conclusion with Space Babies is it's fine. Maybe a little bit too weird here and there, but fine. It's innocent, it's innocuous, it's inoffensive, it's perfectly fine. As I said previously, I don't think that's the episode you really open a new series with. But hey-ho, who am I to judge? Their next comment comes from the Devil's Cord, and they say, I like this one much better than the previous one, but it felt a tad too weird for me at times, and that's a perfectly fine summation with it. Again, much like with the Space Babies thing, this definitely feels like a matter of taste. I know some people just did not take to the whole tone and feeling of the previous episode whatsoever. They aren't a fan of the more mystical, mythical, fantastical direction that Doctor Who in the Russell T Davies Mark II era is going down, and I can respect that, I can understand that, and I myself really did enjoy the episode quite a lot, and he was a hell of a lot of fun. I can't just go back and just re-mention it and discuss it. I know it's not for everybody. I know for a little bit few people it was a little bit over the top. That's perfectly fine. It's a matter of taste. But hey, maybe this week you get the understated, grounded science fiction story that we've all been longing for since Russell T Davies came back. It just so happens that he ended up coming from Stephen Moffat, who apparently he's going to be writing the Christmas episode this year, and there's word that that might be his final Doctor Who story ever. Of course, he did say that he wasn't coming back for this, so you never really know with that man. But anyway, let me know what you thought about this episode. Let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be laid out in next week's video. Thank you for all for lots of blah 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 hubba ha! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!